Remember all those memes about how little screen time Shanks gets? Joke's on us. Some of those rare scenes we got of him weren't even actually him. So here is a pretty crazy statistic. Even before Figurant Frank was revealed to have taken up some of Shanks' preciously rare screen time, Longring Longland's own Foxy had spent more time on page than Shanks and infinitely more time on screen with all of the anime filler. But what this does is open up a whole lot of new questions. In fact, most things about Shanks have now been thrown into temporary turmoil, and this very much made me rethink the iconic meeting between Shanks and Whitebeard, where Whitebeard said that Shanks' face reminds him of the person who gave him his scars. And I still think it makes more sense for that person to have been Garling, who may have defeated Whitebeard during the God Valley incident, who in his younger days did look extremely similar to Shanks. But having another Shanks face floating around does increase the pool of suspects, and perhaps the person who Whitebeard was referring to was Figurant Frank. I'm not going to rule it out at this stage, because if it were true, then it would make Frank that much more intimidating to see on Elbaf right now. But this meeting between Shanks and Whitebeard happened an awfully long time ago now. Chapter 434 to be precise, which was published in November 2006. Almost 20 years ago, so surely Oda didn't have this Shanks double in mind the entire time, right? Well, perhaps wrong, because there is one piece of very compelling evidence to suggest that he might have, and has in fact had this idea in mind since before One Piece even began, like years before. So some of you might be familiar with all of the prototype manga that Eiichiro Oda drew before One Piece was officially serialized. Most of you know about the big names, Romance Dawn, Monsters, which featured Ryuma, Wanted, etc. There's a lot of them, because Eiichiro Oda made more than 20 prototypes before One Piece was finally accepted. And one of them is called Land of the Dragon and the 10 Thieves, the protagonist of which was a very Luffy-looking character named Victor, who served as the original leader of an order of knights. And this is the prototype manga that was the very first mention of the name Shanks, who inherited Victor's position as the current leader of the Order of Knights. And it's implied that this Shanks is the antagonist, because there was some sort of big war that led Victor to being defeated or being ousted, leaving, whatever happened. I guess we'll never know. But either way, the very first appearance that we know of in Eiichiro Oda media featured Shanks as a knight. So I think that seeing another Shanks-like figure this deep into One Piece as a holy knight very well could have been the plan since the beginning. A plan that will eventually devolve into a battle between Crimson Kings, a war, if you will, perhaps even the greatest war since War Thunder. The free-to-play, large-scale, multiplayer fight-battling extravaganza where you get to drive, fly, and sail all of the best Big Bang war vehicles to obliterate your enemies and crown yourself king of the game it is we're talking about. And my favorite aspect of the game it is we're talking about is that you have access to vehicles spanning a century of warfare, from the mid-20th century to the whenever it is when we're at now. Time-traveling, tank battling with the most immersive of graphics, alarmingly adept aircraft with a level of detail that would impress even the most meticulous of military enthusiasts, and super satisfying ships to set sail and immerse yourself in an action blockbuster. The endless versatility very much allows you to choose your own playstyle, with all vehicles in the game able to be upgraded and modded to add that custom touch of flair. And for the first time, War Thunder is proud to present the F-117 stealth aircraft, a subsonic twin-engine stealth attack metal Skybird for your playtime enjoyment. Plus, War Thunder now supports ray tracing and is able to fully realize the power of realistic light, shadows, and reflections, truly bringing your no doubt epic sim battles to life. But man on the internet, how do I do all of these things that you've just said? Well, that's a very good question, and you should be proud for asking. What you do right is you can download War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox by using the link in the description, with all new players and those who haven't played War Thunder for half a year receiving some special bonuses, being a special decorator, Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, and even more gifts, because I've been told that you love gifts, don't you gift lover? And you can also fully immerse yourself in the exciting battles in War Thunder Mobile, an epic mobile multiplayer action game, which you can download and play for free on iOS or Android by using the link in the description. So definitely give War Thunder a go, such a beautiful and immersive game. But for now, it's back to you, me. Hello funny internet man. I read a thread someone made about how Shanks and his twin brother could be mirroring Hati and Skull from Norse mythology. Hati, Shanks, chases the moon, Blackbeard, and Skull, Shanks' brother, chases the sun, Luffy. And Ragnarok signifies when they are both caught. So for some more context here, Hati and Skoll are the sons of Fenrir, and it's currently a very popular idea that Vigeland Garling has or will have Fenrir-related powers because of his moon symbology. I wasn't hugely on board with that idea in the past, and still not hugely on board with it now. But the potential of having these night and day suns certainly does strengthen it. But the goal of these two wolves was to devour the sun and the moon respectively, which, as our very intelligent Grand Fleet member has stated, certainly can apply to Shanks, because practically his entire presence in One Piece to date has been primarily focused on Blackbeard, our personification of darkness. But something else I should say is that Norse mythology is less than clear about which wolf pursues the sun and which wolf pursues the moon. As far as my admittedly basic understanding of this goes, it's mostly up to interpretation, and that could be important because of the names. Hati means the one who hates, and that feels a bit more appropriate for the seriously geared Figgle and Frank, whereas Skoll means the one who mocks, and that definitely suits our more jovial drunkard Shanks. Shanks' twin's name had better be Shaw. When the two meet, we'll then have the Shawshank Redemption. Anyone else think Ange might be Morley's sister? She does have a pretty undeniably Morley vibe about her. I think it's because they both have these very oblong faces with extremely long chins. But the thing is, according to the Vivicard data book, Morley is from West Blue, not Elbaf. So Morley could originate from one of the other tribes of giants, because they do seem to have spread all over the world, as Saul is listed as being from South Blue in the data book. So I'm not sure if Ange is related to Morley, but I do like her design. It's always great to see some unconventionally shaped women in One Piece, because Echiro Oda, he goes crazy with the men all the time, but he's usually much more reserved with women. But to go right back to conventional, I do have to mention Ripley, because due to a video export error that I didn't pick up in the last video, shame on me, her art wasn't rendered, and I just wanted to show the world that we did have a Ripley made and ready to go. And furthermore, I've been informed that there is a marked increase in people wanting to take up a career in biology following the release of this chapter, which I'm sure is just a coincidence, a very large-breasted coincidence. Luffy's pose while thanking Saul reminded me of Jinbei when he met the crew again on Wano. Yes, and there's a reason for that. It's because it is exactly the same. And I didn't recognize this pose at first because in the manga it is very subtle. In chapter 976, all you get is the close-up of Jinbei's hand, but avid anime watchers immediately recognize this because there is a proper full body shot of it, and I suppose that this is my folly for not paying close enough attention to the anime during Wano. In my defense, it was a very, very long 4 years, and whilst the episodes looked great, they were just so very slow. But what's happening here is a Yakuza greeting where you reveal the palm of your right hand, which is a symbolic gesture to indicate that you have no weapon and you're introducing yourself with no intent to start a fight. So what happened here is that Luffy saw Jinbei do this on Wano and he thought that it was so cool that he wanted to whip it out, and he's been waiting for his moment ever since. And something that Dawn and Dusk pointed out on Twitter is that this is particularly adorable because Luffy doesn't quite understand what he's saying. Because Japanese has multiple writing options, which are the kanji, as well as the more simplified hiragana and katakana, with the latter two often being used instead of kanji when a character is speaking with words that they don't fully understand, which in Japanese is how Luffy is written almost all the time. He only uses very basic kanji. And Oda uses this simplified writing style because it helps portray Luffy as a simple person, and this situation is no exception. Luffy is clearly mimicking Jinbei because he's saying the exact same thing, but Jinbei said it more eloquently with kanji, whereas Luffy is just copying it without fully grasping the meaning. And furthermore, on the next page, Luffy quickly devolves and just starts speaking nonsensically. So he tried, and you know what? He ended up doing his very best Jinbei impression for Saul, which if I were Jinbei, I would take as high praise, because Luffy clearly has a very high opinion of him to default to Jinbei's way of speaking in situations deemed as of the utmost of importance. Please never say foreskinning again. Oh. Yeah, I really should have read that before I said it. Here's the thing about the clone. It's not Stella. It's the Vegapunk that left O'Hara. Alright, I have one very, very important thing to say before addressing the actual comment. I see this a lot, but why do people all over the world consistently spell O'Hara with an apostrophe as if it was an Irish surname, you know? Hi, my name is Robin and I'm from O'Hara, Ireland. I've seen people doing this ever since I first started YouTube, and that was a long time ago now. But to get into the actual comment, the implication here is that the Vegapunk clone is about 22 years behind on knowledge, assuming that it was put into storage after it returned from the Emerald Isle of O'Hara. Which, come to think of it, seems like a pretty dick move. If I was the clone, I don't think I'd be hugely happy with being stuffed in a suitcase, given my sentience and desire to not be in a suitcase. Secondly, how did the head fit into that suitcase? And thirdly, mate, if the Vegapunk that visited Ohara was a clone, then how did it have the Mega Mind? Because that's the trait of Vegapunk's devil fruit, the Nomi Nomi Nomi. And look, I guess it's Vegapunk, so I guess he can do literally anything with fictional science, and so he may have made a false head. But given that he can replicate Paramecia abilities, could he have cloned himself with the devil fruit powers? And at one point in time, pre-Suitcase, were there two of the smartest men in the world, devil fruit and everything? And I would be interested to see an incarnation of Vegapunk who is essentially woken up 20 years into the future, and one that doesn't have the experience of everything that's happened, with one of those key events being the transformation of Bartholomew Kuma, considering just how strongly that affected and changed Vegapunk. He might even have a different view of the future of the world. And I do like that idea a lot more than just reviving Stella, although I do maintain that it's still an emotional cop-out. Vegapunk had such a good quote-unquote death, and as I've said in the past, I don't think I'd mind this as much if it wasn't just the latest in a very, very long line of Oda finding ways to undo his own writing. Even if this situation makes perfect sense, and even if it presents a potentially interesting idea to explore, I just feel a bit tired of being death trolled. It's not about logic. There are people in the comments who are like, oh, you just can't read. It's not about that. Every survival of a death scene can be given a logical explanation. But it's about the feeling. It's about Oda writing a death scene with the purpose to milk your emotional teats, and to then sell you back the milk that you've produced. And especially because this Vegapunk clone happens at the same time that we find out everything's probably gonna be okay with Kuma, and Soul is right there in our faces as well. And Soul is a case that I do like, but having all three of them together in this one place is almost like Oda gloating, and I'm surprised he didn't find a way to dangle Pell in front of us as well. So why did Pedro have to die if nobody else does? I don't know. I was gonna say maybe it's because he was a Jaguar, but then again, so was Jaguar D Soul, so that is clearly not it. Add another mysterious, unexplained power to the list with the whole gigantifying books in the Library of the Owl. So this library was such a cool part of the chapter, something that I completely skipped over because Shanks was taking up too much space in my mental inventory. He was a burden. And this does answer a question that we've had ever since learning that Soul took the books from Ohara, which is how would he or any of the giants even read them? And I feel like I'm not the only one out there getting very strong Avatar vibes with the Owl Library. It's very Wan Shi Tong. And that's because in many cultures worldwide, the owl is considered to be a symbol of wisdom. So I suppose the Owl Library is our new tree of knowledge. My thinking with the books, though, is the same as my thinking with pretty much everything else, which is that it's another weird devil fruit power. It's gotta be devil fruit related. Perhaps the caretaker owl has eaten a fruit that allows it to grow and shrink objects. Although I don't know enough about owls to know if there's a mythological connection here, but what I do know is that there is a character named Owl in Hunter x Hunter who has a similar ability called the Fun Cloth, which shrinks anything wrapped up in it. So it could be a coincidence that there are two owls across these manga series with similar powers, or there could be a common owl origin to do with growing and shrinking things that I'm unaware of. I love how you say Kuma with your accent. Sounds like Kuma, and it makes my rotted brain giggle. Yeah, that's Australian for you. I'm actually one of the better ones. If you go too far inland, then you'll start getting the real Aussie twang, where they all say Bartholomew Kuma. And fun fact, there's actually a town called Kuma in both New South Wales and Victoria, the latter of which has a population of approximately 94 people. And I'm sure that they all refer to themselves as Kumas. What I don't understand is why can't it be Shanks himself? What confirms that this is a different person if we can't see the other side of the face? That is a very good question. And the answer is something fictional pirate, something happily ever after. I think that if this was a different manga series, then this figure actually being Shanks would definitely not be off the table, because it is a very dramatic twist to have the good mentor turn out to be the big evil man guy all along, but we do need to remember that this is One Piece. And not just that this is One Piece, more importantly that this is Eiichiro Oda. And the main reason why he draws One Piece is to have a fun, wonderful adventure. Yes, he's capable of writing gut-wrenching, hard-hitting drama covering very serious and morbid topics, but these are exceptions that are sprinkled in among the action, comedy, and adventure, because that's the priority for Oda. And he actually said this once more very recently in an interview with Iñaki Godoy, the live-action Luffy. Iñaki asked Oda what inspired him to create Luffy, and Oda said that it's because he wanted to make a protagonist who could be the ideal child. Someone who never has to grow up and follow the traditional path of adulthood. Someone who always maintains that sense of freedom that only children have. And I promise that I'm getting to the point, but we're going to get there via a bit of a Jewelry Bonnie detour. I also said in the last video that I think Oda will revive Kuma because it would be too painful for him to draw the impact that losing her father would have on Bonnie, because Oda's been writing this thread from his own life experience with his own daughters. But that applies to Luffy as well. He writes Luffy with his own ideals of childlike freedom. And to Luffy, having Shanks turn out to be evil would be an even worse outcome than Shanks dying, because the seed that planted his entire journey would turn out to be a lie. And yes, that is an interesting idea. I think other series can and have explored that, and it leads to a bit of an internal crisis as the protagonist has to reassess and find their own way in the world and blah 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 stuff. We're not talking about other series though. We're talking about One Piece, and the point is that having a twist like that would risk corrupting the ideal child that Oda wants to create. And I don't mean that Luffy himself would become corrupted, he'd become all edgy and such, definitely not, but it risks damaging the core idea that Oda wants to make. Luffy is no longer the ideal child if the person he looks up to the most turns out to be evil and was lying to him the entire time, as if this was all part of some grand master plan. And that's the difference between something like evil Shanks and, say, Ace dying. Ace dying was tragic. I would even go so far as to say not ideal for Luffy, but Luffy is still able to carry the memory and legacy of Ace. The idea of Luffy isn't damaged by Ace's death. It is a challenge to be overcome, but everything Ace was will always be in Luffy's heart and mind. But if Shanks turned out to be evil, then it would remove him from the aforementioned heart and mind. So look, no, it's not confirmed that this isn't Shanks, but I always favor going with the more simple solution until proven otherwise. And in this case, given the nature and tendencies of Oda, the simpler solution is that yes, this is a separate bad Shanks. And look, it's very rare that Occam's razor points us towards the existence of evil twin, but this is one of those situations. However, I will say that jumping to the idea of this being Shanks' brother can and should be seriously questioned, because we do know at the very least that cloning is very possible in the One Piece world, so there are definitely other options that doesn't involve this being Shanks' twin. As a Patrick Star dressed up as Shanks in my comments ominously pointed out, just wait for the revelation that Shanks is actually an acronym for a Mads cloning project. Although just on that, let's say the cloning exists and it happens to you. In that case, what relation are you to you? That's a question that we haven't yet had to tackle as a society. But is a clone considered your sibling because it has the same mixture of DNA from your parents? Or is a clone considered your progeny because it came from you? But also, more ideas. What if Shanks and Frank are clones, but they're clones of Figgle and Garling? Perhaps this was a world government project under Saint Saturn that was happening in tandem with the Mads cloning efforts to recreate their greatest moon warrior. And in which case, what we would have is 3 Shankses running around, because I would refuse to refer to them as 3 Garlings, even if it did turn out to be true. But either way, Eiichiro Oda, you have a lot of explaining to do, and I have no choice but to sit here and wait very patiently for the story lord to invoke more of his fictional pirate sorcery.